Good day to each and everyone. So today, I will be discussing about systematic based on evolutionary relationships taxonomy. So first, let me introduce to you the objectives. Describe the linear system of classification, classify organisms into a hierarchy, and construct and use dichotomous keys for identification. Definition of linear system of classification. It is based on clear physical similarities from the kingdom to the species. It is organized into a taxonomic hierarchy. It is the foundation of all modern categorization systems. It provides a standardized method for scientists to name and organize living organisms. It is also known as the binomial nomenclature system. The linear system is considered the foundation of all modern categorization systems and is commonly known for its use of binomial nomenclature, where each species is assigned a unique two-part Latinized name. Example is ang Homo sapiens for human. So, this system enables scientists worldwide to communicate and study organisms using a common language. Next is definition of classification of organisms into hierarchy. It is a systematic way of organizing and grouping living organisms based on their physical and genetic characteristics. Also, it allows scientists to easily identify and categorize different species and understand their relationships to one another. So, um, it refers to the systematic organization and grouping of living organisms based on their physical and genetic characteristics. So, kini nga process is nag-able siya nga ang mga scientists mag-categorize o mag-identify og lain-laing nga species and able to understand the relationships to one another by placing organisms into distinct groups within a hierarchical structure. Scientists also can effectively organize and study the vast diversity of life on Earth. This classification also nagahelp sa ilaha mag-identify og similarities and differences between species and nagprovide po sila valuable insights into evolutionary relationships and biological diversity. Next is brief history and background of linear system of classification. So the linear classification system of organisms was developed in 1758 by a Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus. So he was also known as Carl von Linné and Carolus Linnaeus, the latter of which was his Latin name. So Carl Linnaeus is considered the father of modern ecology and the father of taxonomy. In the 18th century, Carl Linnaeus published a system for classifying living things which has been developed into the modern classification system. The Linnean system of classification revolutionized the way scientists communicated about organisms and laid the foundation for modern taxonomy. It allowed for the organization of diverse organisms into a logical and understandable system and provided a way to name and identify organisms with a standardized name convention. So, the Linnean system was named after the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus, has a rich story, and is considered a significant milestone in the field of taxonomy. In the mid-18th century, he used reduced a new approach to classify and naming organisms that revolutionized the way scientists organized and understand the natural world. Importance of classification of organisms into a hierarchy. A hierarchical system of classification provides an organized way to, to group organisms based on their shared characteristics. So it helps identify species that are endangered or threatened with extinction. Also, it reflects the evolutionary relationships between organisms. It also provides a way to identify organisms. So, Nagaprovide di siya og systematic o standardized approach for organizing, leading, and understanding the vast diversity life on Earth. Also, it enables effective communication among a scientists that aids in identifying relationships between species, and it contributes to various fields including ecology, evolution, conservation, and medicine. Next is, what is taxonomy? Taxonomy is the scientific study of identifying, naming, and classifying organisms. It involves the use of various methods to describe and differentiate organisms based on the physical and genetic characteristics, evolutionary, and ecological roles. So, ang taxonomy is, nag-play siya og fundamental role in order for us to understand and study the diversity of life on Earth nga nagaprovide og framework for classifying, naming, and identifying organisms as well as ensuring their evolutionary. So what is binomial nomenclature? So binomial nomenclature is a system of naming species. It is essential to integrate the naming system across life sciences and therefore assign one particular unique name identifier for a particular species across different languages. So, binomial nomenclature is a system of naming organisms in which each species is assigned a unique two-part Latinized name consists of the genus and species epithet and provides a standardized and universal way to identify and refer to specific organisms. So, the levels of classification. There are 8 levels of classification: the kingdom, the phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So, levels of classification, also known as taxonomic ranks or categories, a hierarchical division used in the classification of organisms, and these ranks represent increasingly specific groups of organisms. The main levels of classification from most general to most specific are as follows. So, kingdom. The highest and broadest level of classification organisms are grouped into 5 main kingdoms: the Animalia, the Plantae, Fungi, Protista, and Monera or bacteria. Next is the phylum. Phylum in animals or division in plants, the next level after kingdom. Organisms within a kingdom are further grouped into phylls or divisions based on shared characteristics. Next is class. Within a phylum or division, organisms are further categorized into classes. This level represents a group of related orders. Next is order, a level below class, representing a group of related families. Next is family. Family, a level below order representing a group of related genus or singular genus. Next is genus, a level below family representing a group of closely related species. Genera share more similarities with one another than with organisms in other genes. The last is species, the most specific level of classification. It represents a group of organisms that share common characteristics and can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Species names are typically written in Latin and consist of 2 parts: the genus name followed by the species epithet. So, these levels of classification provide a systematic and hierarchical framework for organizing and categorizing the immense diversity of living organisms. They help scientists understand relationships between different organisms and facilitate communication and research in fields such as biology, ecology, and evolutionary studies.
Examples of linear system of classification. Human classification and dog classification. In human, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Primates, family Hominidae, genus Homo, while the species is Homo sapiens. In the dog, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Carnivora, family Canidae, genus Canis, while the species is Canis lupus familiaris. Advantages and disadvantages of linear system of classification. Advantages. The linear system provides a standardized way to classify organisms, which allows scientists to communicate effectively and make predictions about their behavior, habitat, and other traits. The linear system is important because it leads us to the use of binomial nomenclatures to identify each species. Once the system was adopted, scientists could communicate without the use of misleading common names. A human being became a member of Homo sapiens, no matter what language a person spoke. And the disadvantages of linear system relies on physical characteristics to classify organisms which may not reflect their genetic relationship. The major limitation of linear classification system is that it based on physical traits. Physical traits may not necessarily be a sign of relatedness, and indeed DNA evidence has forced scientists to reconsider many classifications based on the old system. Modern developments in classification. DNA-based classification, also known as molecular systematics, is an approach to classification that uses genetic information to determine the evolutionary relationship between organisms. It is based on the idea that the more similar the DNA sequences of two organisms are, the more closely related they are in evolutionary terms. DNA-based approaches used in the identification and classification of species of bacteria include DNA hybridization, DNA fingerprinting, and DNA sequences. Well, it helps us categorize organisms so we can easily communicate biological information of the organisms. Cladics is a method of classification that groups organisms based on their evolutionary relationship as determined by shared derived traits or synamorphisms. This approach is based on the idea that organisms with more shared traits more closely related to each other than those with fewer shared traits. Cladics predicts the properties of organisms. It produces hypotheses and the relationship of organisms in a way that, unlike other systems, predicts properties of organisms. This can be especially important in cases when particular genes or biological compounds are being sought. Dichotomous keys. A dichotomous key is a systematic tool used in biology to identify organisms or objects based on a series of choices between two contrasting characteristics or features. Dichotomous key consists of a series of statements with two choices in each step that will lead users to the correct identifications. Importance of dichotomous key. Dichotomous keys are indispensable tool in scientific research, species identification, taxonomy, education, and conservation. They provide a systematic and structured approach to identifying organisms, enabling scientists, students, and enthusiasts to navigate the complexity of the natural world. Importance of dichotomous keys is that it lets expert and non-expert alike to identify species based on characteristics or their behaviors. There are three basic structures of a dichotomous key. First dichotomy. The first dichotomy in a dichotomous key is the initial set of contrasting choices presented to the user. Second dichotomy. The second dichotomy in a dichotomous key occurs after the initial choice made in the first dichotomy. It further divides the group of the organisms into two more specific categories based on additional distinguishing characteristics. Third dichotomy. The third dichotomy in a dichotomous key occurs after the choices made in the first and second dichotomies. It continues the process of dividing the group of organisms into more specific categories based on additional distinguishing characteristics. These are the examples of dichotomous key. First is the tree identification and the insect identifications. These are the examples of dichotomous key. To create a dichotomous key, you should identify the characteristics, organizing the characteristics, and writing the key. Conclusions. The linear system of classification, developed by Carl Linnaeus in the 18th century, is a hierarchical system for categorizing and naming organisms based on their shared characteristics. The linear system of classification revolutionized the field of taxonomy and laid the groundwork for the modern classification systems. While it has been expanded upon and modified over time, its principles still form the basis for organizing and naming organisms today. The lineage system importance lies in its role as a standardized and widely accepted system for classifying and naming organisms. It helps us comprehend the diversity of life, study evolutionary relationships, and effectively communicate and share knowledge within the scientific community. A hierarchical system of classification provides an organized way to group organisms based on their shared characteristics. Hierarchy refers to a system of organizing and categorizing entities into levels or ranks based on their relationships and similarities. Dichotomous keys are tools used to identify organisms or objects by making a series of choices between two contrasting characteristics or features.